Let's go. Let's go. 3 men, 1 plan. 90 seconds to pull off a perfect crime. They were known as the Stopwatch Gang, the most precise, most disciplined robbers North America had ever seen. They didn't spray bullets. They didn't leave bodies. They just took the money and vanished. It all began on a cold November night in 1979, inside Canada's Joyceville Penitentiary. Guards rushed into cell block 3. A prisoner named Patrick Mitchell was down, gasping for air, sweating, shaking. It looked like a heart attack. The nurse shouted, "He's fading fast! Get him to the hospital!" Within minutes, an ambulance raced out through the gates, sirens wailing into the dark. But this wasn't a rescue. It was a setup. At the hospital entrance, masked gunmen appeared from the shadows, pointing rifles at the guards. "Hands up! Don't move!" In seconds, the stretcher vanished. The ambulance disappeared into the night. The guards were left standing, stunned, realizing they'd just watched a prisoner vanish right in front of them. Patrick Mitchell had just pulled off one of the boldest prison breaks in Canadian history, and it was all part of a master plan. He wasn't just escaping, he was restarting his empire. His partners, Stephen Reed and Lionel Wright, were waiting. The 3 had already made headlines in Canada for stealing $165,000 worth of gold bullion from an airport vault. But now, with their leader free again, they were ready to take things south, straight into the heart of the United States. San Diego, California, sunshine, palm trees, and more banks than they'd ever seen. For Mitchell, it was paradise. "So many banks," he once said. "Such nice money." He meant it. The gang opened small accounts, watched the tellers, studied the guards, memorized the exits. They weren't reckless. They were engineers, calculating, patient, exact. Then came the moment of truth. February 1980. Their first target, a small credit union. No yelling, no chaos, just focus. Mitchell held the stopwatch. Go! 90 seconds later, they were gone. $20,000 in cash. No one hurt. No trace left behind. The FBI had no clue who they were. No names, no leads, just security footage of faceless robbers in masks. They hit again and again. 4 banks in 2 months. $70,000 gone in the blink of an eye. Soon, the press gave them a name. The Stopwatch Gang. They loved it. It became their signature. Halloween masks, wigs, fake beards, and that stopwatch ticking down to freedom. Mitchell believed in precision. Never stay longer than 90 seconds. Never shoot. Never panic. If the timer ran out, you run, even if there's cash still on the counter. That's what kept them alive, what made them unstoppable. But behind every clean getaway, time was catching up. And when time is your greatest weapon, it's also your deadliest enemy. Over the next decade, the Stopwatch Gang would rob millions, taunt the FBI, and become legends of the criminal underworld, until one day, their luck ran out. Because in the end, you can beat the guards, you can beat the police, you can even beat the system, but you can't beat the clock. The night inside Joyceville Penitentiary felt like any other. Cold corridors, the echo of boots, the dull buzz of fluorescent lights. But in cell block 3, something was very wrong. Patrick Mitchell, a man known among inmates for his calm smile and sharp brain, was sprawled on the floor, clutching his chest. His breaths came fast and shallow. Sweat poured down his face like he'd been running for miles. A guard yelled for backup. Another pressed the emergency buzzer. The nurse rushed in and checked his pulse. It was racing out of control. To the staff, it looked like the real thing, massive heart failure. Mitchell's eyes rolled back as he tried to speak. His body trembled. The nurse shook her head. He won't last long. Move him now. No one suspected a thing. No one imagined a man would poison himself on purpose. No one knew that only hours earlier, Mitchell had dissolved cigarette tobacco in water, making a toxic nicotine brew strong enough to send his system into chaos. He was suffering, yes, but he was in control. Guards lifted him onto a stretcher, shouting for the gates to open. The ambulance pulled up with sirens slicing through the prison yard. They pushed him inside and slammed the doors. The driver sped out into the darkness. Everything looked like a desperate fight to save a dying inmate. But just a few miles down the road, everything changed. The moment the ambulance rolled to a stop near the hospital's receiving area, two men emerged from the shadows, masks on, guns raised. "Hands up!" "Nobody move." One of them pointed straight at the guards. The other pulled Mitchell's stretcher out with practiced hands. The nurse froze, heart pounding. The guards didn't dare twitch. Before anyone could call for help, the gunman vanished with Mitchell into the night as if the darkness swallowed them whole. For a moment, there was only silence, then disbelief. A guard whispered, "What just happened?" By the time backup arrived, the escape team was long gone. The mastermind was free. Mitchell's longtime partners, Stephen Reed and Lionel Wright, had orchestrated the entire operation with military precision. They had spent years stealing together, everything from cash to gold bullion. They weren't violent. They weren't sloppy. They were thinkers. They planned every second like chess grandmasters. And Mitchell, he was the king they couldn't leave behind bars. But now that he was out, he was barely conscious. The nicotine had nearly killed him for real. Reed kept slapping his face, saying, "Stay with us, Patty. Come on, stay awake." Wright drove like his life depended on it, steering deeper into the countryside where no patrol cars passed. Hours later, Mitchell finally opened his eyes and took a slow breath. The relief in the car was instant. They had gambled with death, and won. Word of the escape exploded across Canada. The media called it daring, unbelievable, almost cinematic. Guards were interrogated for hours. The government demanded answers. How had 3 robbers humiliated an entire system? How had they slipped out of a maximum security prison without firing a shot? But Mitchell didn't care about headlines. He had no time for celebration. He knew prison doors were still hunting him. If he stayed in Canada, he'd be caught in days. So he told Reed and Wright exactly what they needed to do next. "Pack everything. We're going south." And with that decision, the escape turned into a beginning, the first step toward a new chapter of crime so fast and precise that it would make history. Because now, the Stopwatch Gang was truly born. San Diego, California, the land of sunshine, ocean breeze, and opportunity. For Patrick Mitchell, it was paradise. After years of prison walls and cold Canadian air, this new life felt like freedom itself. But he wasn't there for beaches or palm trees. He was there for the banks, so many of them, so close together, so easy to study. "So many banks," he said with a grin. "Such nice money." Mitchell, Stephen Reed, and Lionel Wright began their new life quietly. They didn't act like criminals. They blended in like tourists. They opened checking accounts in different banks, smiled at tellers, and chatted about the weather. But every visit had a purpose. Every glance, every signature, every deposit was part of their research. They watched how guards moved when the cash deliveries arrived and where the cameras pointed. Wright, the bookkeeper, drew maps and lists. Reed handled the timing. Mitchell analyzed every detail, pacing back and forth in cheap motels, surrounded by scribbled notes and city maps. He was obsessed with precision. No violence, no chaos, just 90 seconds of control. That was his golden rule. Their first target was a small credit union near the edge of San Diego. Not too busy, not too quiet, just right. Mitchell didn't want the biggest bank. He wanted the easiest one to get out of. For days, they sat in cars across the street, pretending to read newspapers while counting guard rotations. Every afternoon, they'd meet in their motel room to review what they saw. "We go in, we go out. 90 seconds. No longer, Mitchell repeated. He carried a stopwatch like a sacred tool. Finally, the day came. February 1980. 3 men in cheap suits walked into the credit union just before closing time. No one even looked twice. Then Mitchell clicked the stopwatch. Time started ticking. "Everyone down?" Reed shouted, voice calm but sharp. Wright blocked the door. Mitchell went straight for the tellers. No screaming, no threats, just a quick, cold order. The staff froze. Cash drawers opened, bags filled. And just as the siren in the teller's mind said, "Call the police," Mitchell glanced at the stopwatch. 87 seconds. "Go!" They were out before anyone even stood up. The tires screeched, and the car disappeared into city traffic. 90 seconds exactly. Later that night, in their motel room, they dumped the cash onto the bed. $20,000. For a first American job, it was clean, easy, perfect. Mitchell smiled. "See? 90 seconds. That's all it takes." From that day forward, they were hooked. The thrill wasn't just the money. It was the precision, the silence, the timing. They started planning new jobs, each one faster and cleaner than the last. Masks became part of the show, Halloween faces that distracted witnesses from remembering anything useful. Some said they wore skeletons, others swore they saw clowns. Everyone was wrong. That was the point. Over the next 2 months, the trio robbed 4 more banks. $70,000 gone in the blink of an eye. Every robbery was clocked, every movement rehearsed. They didn't linger, didn't gloat, didn't waste time. Once the timer hit 90 seconds, they walked out, even if money was still on the counter. Reporters started call them the Stopwatch Gang. The name stuck like glue. The FBI began noticing a pattern. Same speed, same style, same perfection. But they had nothing. No faces, no fingerprints, no names. Just a mystery trio robbing banks and vanishing before sirens could reach the scene. For Mitchell, life in America was better than he ever dreamed. Warm weather, fast cars, clean getaways. But as their pockets filled, so did their confidence. And confidence, in their world, was the first step toward trouble. Mitchell wanted something bigger now, a score so massive they'd never have to run again. He didn't know it yet, but that hunger for more would lead them straight into the biggest heist of their lives, and the beginning of their downfall. It started with a whisper, a rumor about a shipment of gold bars being moved through a small bank in Laguna Niguel, California. For most people, it was just another story. But for Patrick Mitchell, it sounded like destiny. After months of precision robberies and flawless getaways, the Stopwatch Gang was ready for something bigger, something that would make headlines across the nation. They began their research quietly. Reed scouted the area, spending days in the parking lot, timing the armored trucks, counting how many guards went in and out. Wright studied bank schedules, security routines, and even local police patrol patterns. Mitchell handled the psychology, watching how tellers moved, how they reacted to stress, what time the vault door stayed open the longest. Every second mattered. They spent weeks rehearsing every step. Their motel room looked like a war room, blueprints taped to walls, stopwatches lined up on the table, cash bags folded neatly beside fake wigs and masks. Each man knew his role down to the millisecond. Reed controlled the timing. Wright handled the money. Mitchell commanded the scene. The plan was bold, even by their standards. They would hit the bank when it opened, when guards were least alert, and when the armored car delivery would overlap with the morning staff routine. The goal? Grab as much cash and gold as possible, and be gone before anyone outside knew what happened. On the morning of the heist, the sun was bright, the streets quiet. Mitchell looked at his watch. "This is it," he said softly. The 3 men stepped out of the van dressed like maintenance workers. Caps, gloves, tool belts. They walked inside calmly, just like customers. Then the stopwatch clicked. The next 90 seconds were a blur of control. Reed disarmed the first guard before he could reach his weapon. Wright moved behind the counter, filling duffel bags with stacks of cash. Mitchell's voice was calm, almost polite. "Nobody moves. You'll all go home safe if you stay quiet." Tellers obeyed. Cameras caught only fragments of movement. Masked men moving like clockwork. No shouting, no wasted motion. It was perfect. 88 seconds. "Let's go." They ran out, jumped into the waiting car, and vanished down the highway before the first alarm even registered. This time, they walked away with over $240,000 in cash and gold. It was their biggest hit yet. Clean, silent, surgical. The press exploded with headlines. "The Stopwatch Gang strikes again." The FBI's frustration grew. They had no leads, no fingerprints, nothing. One agent said, "They rob banks like they're running a science experiment." But the fame came at a price. Every news story made Mitchell feel invincible. He started enjoying the attention, reading every headline like it was a trophy. Wright, on the other hand, grew quiet. He knew fame brought heat, and heat meant mistakes. Their next jobs became riskier. They started moving too fast, taking chances they used to avoid. One robbery nearly went wrong when a teller fainted and hit the silent alarm early. For the first time, police cars arrived before they were gone. Mitchell floored the gas, swerving through traffic, laughing like a man who believed he could outrun fate. In the motel that night, they sat in silence. The laughter was gone. Reed stared at the ticking stopwatch on the table. "We were 10 seconds from getting caught," he muttered. Mitchell didn't answer. Deep down, he knew it was true. Still, he couldn't stop. The money, the timing, the control. It was like a drug. And now, he had a new idea. A final job so big, it would make them legends forever. A robbery not just for cash, but for history. He didn't care about risk anymore. He wanted to prove they were the best. But in the criminal world, the moment you start thinking you're untouchable, that's the moment everything starts to fall apart. He dissolved into the world like smoke, changing faces as easily as other men changed coats. One week, he was a shy tourist with a camera slung over his shoulder. The next, he was a businessman ordering champagne at a casino bar. For 7 years, Patrick Mitchell perfected the art of being unseen. He grew beards, shaved them off, dyed his hair, learned new accents, and wore wigs so convincing even old friends had to do a double take. Disguises weren't just costumes, they were survival tools. Timing was his religion, and anonymity his altar. When he left a town, he left no footprint. Motel receipts were paid in cash, cars were rented under false names, and safe houses were chosen for their distance from curiosity. He never kept money where it could be traced. He spent freely, designer clothes, lavish dinners, fast cars, but always with the caution of a man who knew every dollar could someday be a breadcrumb pointing right back to him. He cultivated small-town friends who liked his charm and didn't ask questions. He cultivated habits that made him predictable in the minors and impossible to pin down in the majors. He also kept working. Robbery was a craft he never abandoned. Each job was a study in rhythm, the movement of bank tellers, the timing of armored trucks, the gap between a phone call and a police radio. 90 seconds remained his rule. Never linger. Never raise a voice. The headlines called him audacious. The banks called him a nightmare. For every robbery reported, for every security camera that caught only a blur, Mitchell walked away with cash that bought silence and distance. He never wanted fame, but fame found him anyway, partly because he couldn't resist the human vanity of reading his own legend in the papers. The FBI developed a picture of the man they could not catch. Meticulous, patient, almost gentlemanly in his refusal to hurt anyone. He's not violent, agents would tell reporters. He's surgical. The label stuck. The gentleman bandit. Public fascination soared. TV shows ran reconstructions. Documentary segments replayed grainy footage in living rooms across North America. Each broadcast produced tips, some useful, most false, but they all fed the chase. One tip, years into the hunt, pointed half a world away to the Philippines. Someone swore they'd seen a man matching Mitchell's description in Manila, living quietly under a different name. The FBI moved on the lead, flying to the tropics with a mix of hope and exhaustion. Agents staged a raid on a waterfront villa packed with evidence, hotel receipts, spare passports, and a woman who claimed to be his wife. But the man they wanted had slipped away yet again. A neighbor remembered a late-night departure. A gardener shrugged. A fishing boat's log showed a name that could not be traced. Agents left with battered notebooks and the ache of another near miss. The misses piled up. Mitchell became myth. Mythology made men sloppy. Some of his associates were caught and talked, but the stories they told were full of holes and echoes. Reed and Wright, his longest collaborators, were imprisoned at different times, serving sentences that drew the curtain on one chapter of the gang. Mitchell watched from afar, sometimes grieving partnerships, sometimes relieved to be alone. He cultivated a private life when he could, a marriage in a foreign country, a child who would not be handed an inheritance of headlines. He liked to think of himself as a provider more than a predator, convincing himself that he never intended bloodshed, only speed and the clean taking of cash. That belief comforted him through lonely nights and long drives, but it couldn't erase the fact that every dollar he stole was someone else's security deposit, someone else's payroll. The moral math never balanced. Still, the years on the run gave him a swagger. He became a study in paradox, frivolous in spending, exacting in planning, generous with strangers, stingy with truth. He read every article that mentioned him, learning which aliases flattered the press and which attracted detectives. He played the celebrity game quietly, letting rumors circulate while maintaining his signature. The stopwatch, the 90 seconds, the vanish. But living as a masterpiece of misdirection wore a man down. The constant recalibration, new passports, new faces, new cities, eroded the sharp edges of luck. The FBI's obsession hardened into expertise. New technologies, new networks, and 1,000 small mistakes by others began to form a net. For now, Mitchell stayed ahead, a ghost with a timetable. For now, he continued to believe he could outrun the clock. Time, the one thing Patrick Mitchell thought he could always control, finally turned against him. After years of flawless planning, calculated robberies, and legendary escapes, the man once called the Stopwatch King began to feel the edges of luck closing in. Age dulled his reflexes, and paranoia became his constant companion. Every siren sounded closer, every knock at the door felt like the one that would end it all. He had spent over a decade outsmarting law enforcement, living under countless names and faces. But the game was wearing him down. His partners, Stephen Reed and Lionel Wright, were both captured. One during a quiet evening in a diner, the other after an informant tipped off the FBI. Mitchell was now alone, drifting across states, robbing smaller banks just to keep moving. Each job carried more risk, less reward, and none of the old satisfaction. By the late 1980s, he was living in the desert heat of Arizona, under the alias Robert Wilson. To the locals, he was just a quiet man with a limp, always polite, always on time. But to the FBI, he was still their ghost, the most elusive bank robber in North American history. For years, they'd chased his shadow, never catching more than a blurred security photo or a false lead. But technology was changing. Cameras were sharper, databases smarter, and Mitchell was no longer as fast as he used to be. His final act came not with a bang, but with a mistake. It was 1981, and Mitchell had decided on one last heist, a job that would set him up for good. A small bank in Arizona, nothing fancy, just enough to disappear again. He planned every move with the precision that made him famous. But this time, something went wrong. A security guard, new on the job, noticed something off. The way Mitchell watched the entrance, the way his hand hovered near his jacket pocket. The robbery still went through. The gang took the cash, escaped as usual, but the guard had already noted down part of their license plate. Within hours, the FBI had a lead. Days later, a sting operation closed in. Mitchell was driving down a quiet highway when the flashing lights appeared in his rearview mirror. For a moment, he considered running, just like old times. But he didn't. He pulled over, calm, silent. The stopwatch lay in the glove compartment, still set at 90 seconds. When agents surrounded him, one of them said softly, "We've been chasing you for a long time." Mitchell smiled. "Yeah," he replied, "but it was a hell of a run." In court, reporters crowded to see the man who had baffled 2 nations. They expected a monster, but saw a quiet, aging man who looked more like a retired teacher than a criminal mastermind. When asked why he did it, Mitchell gave a faint smile and said, "Because I could." He served his sentence quietly, earning respect even from guards who'd grown up hearing his story. No violence, no arrogance, just calm acceptance. He knew he'd spent his life racing a clock that never stopped ticking. Patrick Mitchell was released years later, older, slower, and mostly forgotten by the world that once feared him. He disappeared again, this time for good. No more robberies, no more disguises. Some say he died peacefully somewhere in the Southwest. Others claim he lived under a new name until the end. But the legend never faded. The Stopwatch Gang became a symbol of intelligence and precision in a world of chaos. They didn't rely on guns or fear, only time and nerve. And Patrick Mitchell? He proved something few criminals ever could. You can plan every second of your life, but in the end, time always wins.